All right, and we're back for another episode of the Sports Department Podcast with Justin and Jesse, and it's just us. We're talking some NBA. Main news out of the association is that LeBron James out indefinitely from an injury over this past weekend where it's basically an ankle sprain, and also frontrunner for Rookie of the Year, LaMelo Ball, out with a wrist injury. He's trying to get a second opinion, but the general diagnosis for the first part of it is it's a fracture in his wrist, so that will sideline him for the rest of the year. So two candidates for two high-profile awards are out for the remainder of the season, and plus we still have some possible trade talks with the trade deadline coming down the pipe, as well as we'll get into, Phoenix and Utah, who are pretty good out west, and if they're pretty legit or not. And then we'll talk about the Nets and the Sixers and the Bucks, because right now it's really just a three-headed race to see who's coming out of the East. So, Jesse, what's going on?
I mean, a lot. You hit on it. We got a lot going on. I think the most interesting topic to jump in with is the LeBron being out. How far can the Lakers fall? When I first was looking at the schedule, I'm predicting that he's probably going to be out at least 3 weeks.
Well, because that's the thing. Like,
I think there's no way he comes back before then.
In the NFL, you hear high ankle sprain. That's like 3 to 4 weeks generally when you think about it.
Yeah.
So, and that's only one game a week. With
Exactly. So you got to think, even if he comes back in, a month or so, he could still be sitting out on back-to-backs. And he could be having to, minutes restrictions when he comes back. And then obviously Davis is out too. He's been out. And he doesn't really have a timetable for when he's coming back either.
Well, that's exactly it. It really leaves the Lakers with basically nothing. And
it's Dennis Schroeder and
Kuzma.
Kuzma. Yeah.
And really looking at that, that kind of goes into the topic we'll talk about later with like the Jazz and the Suns. The Lakers, yeah, they won the title last year. Great. But right now they're down and hurt because LeBron, he's slowly coming out of his prime of being invincible because we've slowly seen the injuries start to rack up, not frequently, but at least once a year where he hurts something and he's out for an extended period of time. Usually it's around like Christmas, December time, but obviously since the season got pushed back, but it's kind of like Mike Trout in the MLB where it's one significant injury per year that takes him out. Now, all that really matters is if he's going to be ready for the postseason. But when you hear indefinitely, you really don't know what that means.
Yeah, well, here's the thing: if he's out for a month from now, which is around the 23rd, you're looking at, I think, only 2 or 3 games that you can really give to the Lakers easily, and then maybe 2 or 3 others they could be looking at with LeBron and Anthony Davis out a 4-16 record, a 5-15, and at that point, you're sitting at 28-15 right now. When they come back, you could be sitting at 35-28, or 33-30.
Because you got the Pelicans, which isn't a gimme game like you would think, and then you got the
by
Sixers,
any means, no.
The Cavs, the Magic, the Bucks, the Kings. Maybe that's a gimme game for the
Lakers. I say Cavs and Magic are both games they can definitely win. Looking past that, when you have the Kings up next, then the Clippers, then the Raptors, then the Heat, Nets, and Knicks, I think those are all losses.
Yeah, you almost have to assume he's going to be out for all of April to be safe because you don't want to re-aggravate it.
Yeah, also the Kings, Clippers, Raptors, Heat, Nets, Knicks run, that's all road games. That's all one big road stint. Then they come back, they play the Hornets in LA one night where they'll probably win, especially if LaMelo's not playing. Then they go back on the road, I believe, for the Celtics, Jazz, and then Jazz again, and then Mavericks.
Yeah.
So even in the time that LeBron could be coming back, let's say mid-April, he could be coming back to play the Celtics, the Jazz twice, and then the Mavericks twice.
And you got to assume, like with the Jazz and the Mavericks back-to-back for each of them, you got to assume maybe they split, right?
Yeah. So you're looking at LA now as, forget this top 3 seed. It's most likely it's more likely that LA has to play in than them being a top 3 or 4 seed at this point to me.
Well, and
But
that's the
I
thing.
don't trust Kuzma, and I don't trust those guys that they have. Maybe if they still had some of the depth they had last year with Rondo and some playmakers, but this team does not have playmaking
Because the play-in
without
tournament
those guys.
is the 7 through 10 seeds, right?
Yeah.
So you got the Spurs, the Mavericks, the Warriors, and the Grizzlies, right? They're only
All those teams still trying to be better.
within
No,
5.
none of those. Yeah.
Yeah. They're all within 5 games or so of the 3 seed, give or take.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if the Lakers hit a bad skid, they could see themselves on the way on the outside
And
looking in potentially.
Even at the 11 seed right now is the Pelicans, who have gotten hot and cold for stretches. If they can put it together, that's another team. I mean, you hear that, and out of all those teams, LA doesn't want to play Dallas, and they don't want to play San Antonio going in. They're probably fine with playing, Memphis or New Orleans, but there's a definite chance. I feel like I feel like the farthest they'll fall is the 6. I think they'll hit around 6. I don't know if they'll go play in tournament, but I do think there's absolutely no way they're a top 4 seed. They are not going to have home court advantage in the playoffs.
And the teams up top, the Jazz, the Suns, the Clippers even, this is where they need to strike now because they're wounded and they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
And Denver too. Denver's turned around their season a lot and started to rack up wins.
And
don't expect them to slow down.
And this is the year for Denver to really take that next step that they've been trying to take. And with LeBron sort of out of the way, it opens the way for the rest of the teams who've been bogged down by LeBron basically to take that step.
And not even for, LeBron to be out per se, but to at least get home court advantage over him. Where
home court, we assume now will actually matter this season.
Will actually matter. And I think it's going to matter more than ever this year because with fans being stripped out and then being put back in, I think by the time we hit playoffs, when we're going to be at, we might be at 100% capacity. We might be at 75% capacity.
Certain arenas too, depending on the states.
Yeah, and depending on how, the vaccinations and everything go. But that we're looking at potentially, full house for potential playoff teams, looking at probably Utah and Denver and Phoenix. They're going to open stuff up before other ones will. So playing out west, they're going to have more full arenas, and LeBron's going to have to go on the road potentially.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. We'll circle back to LeBron and what this injury does for the potential MVP race in a little bit. But I want to talk about LaMelo Ball and his injury because it's kind of the same question where he was basically the front runner for the entirety of the season up until this point. If he misses the remainder of the season, which is about, 2 months or so and change, give or take.
Yeah, around then.
Does he fall out of contention for it at that point? Because really, who else is there? Anthony Edwards, but the record really isn't there from the Timberwolves compared to the impact LaMelo has had on the Hornets.
I think, well, first off, if the Kings make a push for the playoffs and Halliburton is a big part of that, I definitely think he could put himself in there. Anthony Edwards, he's really flashy. A lot of people really like him. If he plays the rest of the year, there's going to be a conversation of if he should win. But I think there's no question that the best rookie was by far LaMelo Ball. And thinking about Charlotte, this is a team that wanted the playoffs and they were right in the thick. They were at the 8th seed. And they were going for it. They were potentially,
why we saw them bring in Gordon Hayward.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were talking about getting involved in trade talks. There were, guys that they were looking at that they wanted to make this team better. But going forward, if I'm Charlotte, I'm trading off any of the assets that I don't see being part of the future of this team, whether that's Devontae Graham or Malik Monk or maybe PJ Washington or Zeller or whatever they think doesn't fit with LaMelo Ball. And I believe they really like Terry Rozier, so I think they really want to keep him and Hayward. I think those are the only three guys that they really don't
that are
want to
untouchable.
move. Exactly. So I would get rid of those other guys, get back what you can,
and then retool for next year at that point.
Fall really, back into the lottery and get another, top 10 pick. You get a top 10 pick, you pair that with LaMelo and Hayward and Rozier, and then you free up some cap space and you go and get somebody in free agency too.
And that's the thing. We consistently started to see, Charlotte Hornet highlights, Charlotte Hornet, being featured on like NBA TV, like LaMelo.
Charlotte's fun to watch.
Yeah, he elevated that team well beyond, quite frankly, what Kemba did, if we're being honest.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Just viewership appeal.
This is the thing. LaMelo, even if Kemba was the better player in Charlotte, LaMelo made them watchable.
That's the thing.
And you can't say that for Kemba. Kemba could have these great, terrific scoring performances and they lose by 15 and it wasn't interesting. So I think LaMelo is, he's special. He was a special rookie this year and he's making us talk about Charlotte. Yeah. When has anybody
in my 4 years
talked about Charlotte
in talk radio at college? I rarely talked about them, only to get
the only time I ever mentioned them was to talk about how bad of an owner Michael Jordan was. And here's the thing, like you hit on one really good rookie that's exciting, and it can completely turn around your franchise.
We're seeing that's what's happening with the Knicks. Emmanuel Quigley and company is making it at least a respectable team to watch again.
Reclamation project and Julius Randle, Charlotte. Everybody laughed at Charlotte when they gave Terry Rozier that money, when they had to do the trade thing for Kemba and all that. I didn't love the contract when it happened, but Charlotte bet that he was going to develop even more when a lot of people thought he was done and that was as good of a player as he was going to be. So, good for Charlotte. This is the first time in a long time that Charlotte is at all relevant, and they can entirely thank LaMelo Ball for that.
And I think that's what could very well carry him to still be Rookie of the Year, even if he doesn't play. It's just the impact he had on his team, and with it taken away, you can really appreciate what he was doing for the Hornets. And unless Anthony Edwards and Halliburton really kind of kick it to the next gear,
here's the thing about
I think it's still his.
Edwards is incredibly inefficient. He is, and which that usually comes with the thing of being a rookie a lot of the time when you're that athletic, dynamic player and you're not exactly a jump shooter or a facilitator. He's still trying to figure out where he's fitting in the league. So you can see these games where he's taking 19 shots and only making 6 of them. There's a lot of games with Edwards where, he has a 40-point game and he looks great. And then there's games where he just won't stop shooting.
Yeah.
And at this point in the NBA, where it's so analytics heavy and it's so heavy on 3-point shooting and it's so heavy on making your team better as a whole, I personally don't think Anthony Edwards should be in the conversation. Yeah. Because of just the sheer inefficiency.
But that's just the Timberwolves as a whole. They're just a mess.
Can't get healthy. Don't know who the number one option is. Can't put anything together.
So can't getting healthy is actually a pretty good segue, because 2 out of the 5 front runners for the NBA MVP are hurt. Embiid, LeBron, and then you got Jokic, Giannis, and James Harden. Right? At that point, Embiid was the front runner for the longest time. He goes down. Then you're kind of default. It's the LeBron. He goes down, leaving Nikola Jokic, Giannis, and James Harden. At this point, who do you think it is that's the front runner?
I think it depends on how much longer Embiid's out. If Embiid comes back in another week, I think Embiid can still win it. One thing that could go against him that I don't think enough people are talking about, Philly has been winning without him. They haven't been winning necessarily pretty, but they've been winning. They haven't necessarily,
they're getting by.
Him. Exactly. I think in their last 10, they're 8-2. So, they're doing fine on their own. LeBron, I think he's going to be out too long. They're going to be cautious with that. They're going to fall too low in the standings. I think LeBron is most likely out. Giannis, they're not going to want to give it to him a third year in a row. I don't think there's any way that they give him that. unless they go on this ridiculous run and they far and away beat the Nets and 76ers in the standings and take the 1 seed. I don't see it. And then you look at James Harden, there's some people don't like how he left Houston. They don't count what he did in Houston. And then they take away somewhat of what he's done in Brooklyn because he's playing with Kyrie, who is also having an MVP type year.
You brought up a good point. I really don't think you can discredit the way Harden forced his way out of Houston.
I totally agree.
Was it the best way? Absolutely not. Was it a messy breakup? Completely. But also, since he's gotten to Brooklyn, he's completely changed his game from the isolation, to quote Evan Roberts, dribble, fat type of guy, shoot, to he's playing point guard. He's filling in what he needs to do. He's getting triple doubles, and he's not at the isolation player that they were asking him to be in Houston.
He's also leading the league in assists and averaging over 11.
Kyrie literally said when he got here, "You're the point guard." And it's worked, and it's kept the Nets in the top of the East. And that's without Durant for the past month or so at this rate. So you really got to take Harden into consideration. I'm not the biggest James Harden guy, but you have to respect what he's doing. I'm not saying he's solely carrying the Nets because they are a good team top to bottom. But if it was just Kyrie without Durant, which we saw last year for a portion of it,
it's not the same.
It's nowhere near the same.
Hey, keep Jared Allen and Karis LeVert and Kyrie Irving and run that. They're a good team. They're not the 15-1, 16-1, Kyrie Irving and James Harden Nets. They're just not. But I think the front runner as of right now, I think they want to give it to Jokic. Denver started off the year slow. They're putting it together. When it's all said and done, they're probably going to be top 3 in the West. He's
this just
doing everything for them.
If he gets it, it feels like this has just been a long time coming for him.
Yeah.
Because it always feels like it's either who's ever had like statistically the best season, the most dominant season, but then it always kind of feels like it's whoever got, the small market team, the little engine that could over the hump and just kind of busted their ass to get to where they are. And that's what he's done.
Yeah.
We kind of always said, Denver needs a star. Denver needs another star. Quite frankly, they've had one and they developed him in Jokic.
Yeah. It also is, do you think Denver's, going to be a championship level team or not? Because the standings are going to come down to a big part of what Jokic does. If they're, still hovering around the 4 or 5, I don't think so. But if they're a top 2, maybe if it's them, Phoenix and Utah really up at the top, you can make that argument.
It always kind of warms my heart a little bit when like a smaller market team gets an MVP, just because it's like everyone's kind of really appreciating what they're doing rather just being like a LeBron, a Harden to an extent. Like when Giannis won the first one, it's like, okay, it's like Milwaukee. They haven't had an MVP since Kareem or Oscar Robertson. Has Denver ever had an MVP? I don't think so.
The only MVP level players would be Melo and maybe Dikembe, but Dikembe I don't think was the MVP level player.
The MVP race is a little cluttered. The injuries to Embiid and LeBron does kind of clear it up a little bit, but you can make an easy case for Jokic, Giannis, or Harden in their own right. So the trade deadline is coming down. I don't necessarily know. Is it the end of this month?
It's 3 days or 2 days away from when we post. It's like the 25th.
Okay, so it's this week sometimes, basically.
Yes.
And for a long time coming, Aaron Gordon has finally requested a trade, right?
Yes, formally requested.
So he's finally had enough of Orlando. The kind of half-baked roster that they've kind of put together where they've had flashes, but then they've also kind of looked like same old Orlando. I think it's time for them to break it up, and then there could go Vucevic, Aaron Gordon, Evan Fournier, Terrence Ross. And they have some pieces to get significant value back if they did decide to fucking blow it up, basically.
Yeah. Keith Smith, great reporter for the NBA. He put together what he thinks Orlando once for everybody on their roster. Vucevic, multiple firsts and young players. Gordon, 2 firsts and a young player. Terrence Ross, a first rounder and a young player. Fournier, a young player and / or a first.
Yeah, it's basically
I think
they all want firsts for him, which makes sense.
They're valuing, I think, a first rounder too much for about everybody. Vucevic, I think you could get multiple firsts and a young player for. I think that's fine.
Multiple players is a little much.
Multiple firsts and multiple players, I don't know about that. Aaron Gordon, 2 firsts and a young player. First and a young player. Ross is a first and a young player? Absolutely not. I'll give you one or the other.
Yeah,
you're not getting both.
It seems like they're kind of doubling their value of what they want in return. Kind of slash it in half, and that's more realistic, I think.
Yeah, and I hope that's, when somebody calls with that offer, I really hope
they consider
it.
Yeah, because they need to reset it.
Well, and if they don't consider, they're just rolling in with this team again next year.
And they're just kicking the can down the road to when inevitably they just lose them to either free agency or they're just bad contracts if they regress. And then you get significantly less.
And they're going to be, and this is the thing. If they keep these guys through the trade deadline, they're going to be a little bit better than some of the worst teams in the NBA. They're not as bad as Minnesota. They're not as bad as Houston.
And that's where they kind of...
You're going to fall at like 5 or 6, maybe 7 in the lottery as opposed to 1, 2, or 3.
It's kind of like the Washington Wizards predicament where they're never completely basement bad.
The Hawks were the best example. The Hawks made the playoffs 14 straight years.
But they're consistently
never
mediocre.
Higher than a 4 seed. Yeah.
And you never really do anything at that point.
Exactly.
So what's best for the Magic is to finally blow it up. It's been a long time coming, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, you have Fultz and you have Jonathan Isaac too.
Yeah, they have something
those
to
are the
rebuild
guys
with.
You need to build around. I think that's obvious. Vucevic has played out of his mind this year. He's carried them at points. He's played great.
The way to approach a trade deadline, really, for any sport is this player's current value at its highest, and will it stay like this for much longer? If it won't, that's when you gotta sell.
Yeah. Well, and with LeBron going down and Embiid being hurt, I think, some people think the NBA championship is locked to Brooklyn. Other people think the race is absolutely wide open. It's kind of a differing thing. It's either Nets and Lakers if they can put it together with health, or it's completely wide open and anybody can win it. If you're one of those people that thinks it's completely wide open and anybody can win it, Boston could use like 2 of these guys. Boston could use Vucevic and Gordon. That puts them into, a contender category. There's a lot of teams. If Toronto were to get one of these guys, it can move them up potentially. Utah, Phoenix, if they could somehow trade for some of these guys, it helps a lot. Like these are talented players. It's just it never worked in Orlando, and that's no fault on them. There's all different timelines.
It just happens.
But you gotta you can't just hold on to an asset and just let it depreciate and let it depreciate and let it depreciate like the Cavaliers did with Kevin Love. You can't.
He has no value anymore.
You can't just hold on to an asset.
I forgot. Is he still acting? Is he even playing still?
I truly don't know.
Yeah, because I don't see his name come up anywhere at times. But you kind of hinted to 2 teams a little bit: the Jazz and the Suns. Right now, they're both sitting on top of the West. And is this sustainable for the rest of the season? Because Utah has, quite frankly, had one of the best seasons of my lifetime that I could remember. They started off extremely hot. They haven't slowed down. They're still 30-11. But can this be sustained success into the playoffs?
Utah, I don't know. I don't think so. They live and die by the 3, and while that's all well and good,
that's majority of teams, though.
But it's different in the playoffs, because in the playoffs you need shot makers. You need tough shot creators. When I look at that team, there's 2 shot creators, and one of them is Jordan Clarkson. I can't trust that team. Donovan Mitchell is fantastic. Rudy Gobert is an amazing regular season player. But in the playoffs, he can't play that many minutes because he gets played off the court by his limited shooting. We seen teams last year, Denver in particular, go at Gobert. The defensive player of the year, they went at him and they were successful with it
and exposed him significantly.
Exactly. We're at a point where Rudy Gobert is a fantastic regular season player when, you need to get a bunch of wins, but in the playoffs, he's not, he doesn't have any offense. He doesn't have anything that he gives you besides that rim protector that at this stage in the NBA and when we go to the playoffs, you don't need a rim protector for about 30 minutes out of the 48 minutes of the night.
Yeah.
Phoenix, on the other hand, I like Phoenix pretty much at every position.
They finally got the point guard that they've needed to just run the team effectively in Chris Paul.
Yeah, well, and I wasn't the biggest Chris Paul fan. Back in Houston and everything, and with the Clippers, I felt like he consistently underperformed. But really, what he's done in Oklahoma City and Phoenix has really changed my mind a good amount.
He's kind of taken like the coach on the floor type of role. Like I think he just accepted that he's not the star player anymore, and he can defer to other people, and that's more productive than him trying to be the star he was.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing of he's somebody that has finally made it so there's somebody to hold them accountable on defense, at least. Like Phoenix is finally playing defense. That was always kind of the thing going into this year and previous years was, they can score. Devin Booker can score. There's a lot of guys who can, go out and run an offense and do those kinds of things. But can they stop anybody? Bridges has been fantastic. He's really developed. He's one of those guys that can switch 1 through 5. Paul is obviously still a great defender. Booker, not a fantastic defender, but he's at least trying. And then as long as Ayton keeps making, these leaps and bounds, and then you have Dario Saric, who's a potential 6th man of the year.
Yeah, it's kind of just fallen together nicely.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't even mentioned Cam Johnson, who's played fantastic as well for them. I think they have great depth, but it's depth that can actually play in the playoffs. They're going to be able to run exactly. They're going to be able to run 8 or 9 deep in the playoffs when other teams are only going to be able to run 7. I like Phoenix a good amount. I don't know if they're necessarily finals contenders, but I would not be shocked if they were in the Western Conference Finals.
They could be like last year's Denver team that just kind of puts together and goes on a run.
Exactly. I totally agree.
And quite frankly, if you're a Phoenix Sun fan, that's what you want.
That's what you want. You were literally not in the playoffs last year.
They haven't had anything since Steve Nash and company, basically. Yeah. So real quick before we wrap up, the East has 3 significant top-heavy teams: the Sixers, the Nets, the Bucks. Then the drop-off of quality of teams is significant behind that. The Hawks, the Heat, the Celtics, the Knicks, the Hornets, and then everyone else who's not even in the top 8 right now. Can any of the other teams make it out and challenge either of the top 3 teams for the East? Because quite frankly, I don't think so, just because of the significant talent drop-off. Maybe the Heat, but they relied on the bubble and benefited tremendously from that last year. Outside of that, I really don't think so.
I think we'll see what happens with the trade deadline. You never want to bet on the Celtics making a move because God, they never do. But they've had the assets for it. They have the $28 million trade exception. They have to use it. You can't possibly not use it. Now it depends. Do they use that and get a guy like Vucevic, or do they take that and get a guy like Harrison Barnes? Because those are 2 very different things. I think Boston always has the potential to be a scary team. I personally don't think they have it. Toronto, well-coached team. I don't think they have it.
They should hit the reset button.
Yeah, I get them wanting to run it back another year, though. But Toronto's interesting. They can beat anybody on any given night, but I don't think in a 7-game series. Atlanta, I don't like the way they match up with the top 3 teams.
They're also very young
they're too small
in comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate McMillan has done a fantastic job there, though. They haven't lost, I think, since he took over. So I think that really goes to show majority of their struggles, I think, were coaching related. And then, the Knicks are I think the Knicks are a scrappy young team. They're similar to how the Nets were in 2018. But come on, they're not winning a series.
They're still the Knicks.
Yeah, it's if Indiana gets in, they're an interesting team because they have a lot of talent. But I really think, as far as I'm concerned, I don't even put Milwaukee, up there. I think this is really Nets and 76ers. And if the Bucks, somehow get into the Eastern Conference Finals with one of those other teams, I think it's a foregone conclusion that it's one of them.
Yeah,
and as far as I'm concerned, I think Brooklyn is a much better team than Philly too, when it's all going to be said and done.
Yeah,
I think, I could be a little biased here, but watch the Nets play. Just watch them play.
Someone called Kevin Durant that's getting ready to come
literally
back.
Not even exactly. Like you watch the Nets and you're like, wow, they're really good. They might like be a championship team. And you're like, wow, if they only had like one more wing, like one forward, and then you're like, oh yeah, like a top 2 player in the NBA is sitting on their bench.
Yeah.
And also I think Blake,
he dunked.
Everybody's going crazy about the dunk, and then some people are like, oh, he only finished with 2 points. If you watched Blake play, he was playing good defense. He was playing revitalized.
Blake also doesn't have to do what he was doing in Detroit anymore. He can just kind of hang out.
He was the point forward in Detroit. Yeah. He is going to be like the 4th playmaker on the Nets at any given time. So out east, it's Nets, 76ers, Bucks, and then everybody else.
Yeah.
But I really think it's like Nets, 76ers, kind of everybody else.
I agree. And with that wraps up the NBA podcast. When we come back later in the week, we'll have the NL West and then some wrestling. So make sure you stay tuned, subscribe, and follow us on all of our social media platforms. We'll see you in the next one.